For the past 5 decades, Dr. Sherwin Nuland has been exploring the mysteries of the human body firsthand as a surgeon. Since 1962, he has taught at the Yale School of Medicine as a clinical professor of surgery. As an author, he's also credited with being able to simplify the complex world of medicine for the average reader. His 1994 book, How We Die, won the National Book Award and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. His new book, The Mysteries Within, explores the relationship between medicine, history, and folklore by focusing on 5 organs: the heart, the stomach, the liver, the spleen, and the uterus. He illustrates how medical science has gradually disengaged from myth and illusion over time. I am pleased to have him here to talk about these subjects. Welcome back.
Well, it's great to be here.
You also make note that the thing that you know the least about medically and personally is the uterus in terms of your
That's right. Maybe that's why it fascinates me so, yeah.
What you have done here is very interesting, and there's some broad themes, but also when you have taken each of these organs, spleen, liver, and give us a chance to understand its historical evolution in terms of perception, some of the myths and magic and superstitions that are there, and how it ends up in terms of a scientific thing. You also do something interesting in a broader thing, which is, on the one hand, there are superstitions and mysteries that you tend to debunk. On the other hand, you talk about, in medical science today, magic is not something to be dismissed totally.
Precisely. Well, we all know the so-called placebo effect. You give someone a sugar pill, and in between 28 and 55% of cases, the sugar pill makes that person better. Now, we don't know why that works, but what it says is that there is an aura around medical care, regardless of who administers it. So what do you do when you go into a great modern hospital? You're treated by a bunch of men and women now with white coats. They're very impressive. We forget that those white coats have replaced the red body paint of the ancient healer. The very atmosphere of this thing is almost supernatural of the hospital, very much like the old Asclepian healing temples of the Greeks. There's a language that you don't understand. There are these colored pills, just like the colored pills used in the 15th century. So there's an entire atmosphere of, you damn well better get better if you're here.
Yeah. Talk about the specific organs, and we'll come back to some of the medical myths, or incorporate them within. Let me begin with the one that intrigues me the most, the heart.
Right. Well, the heart has always been a structure that people are very aware of. Clearly, one can hear it beat under certain circumstances.
The rhythms of life.
The rhythms of life. It is the background rhythm against which we live our life. If you hear any pop music today, you always hear the heartbeat in the background. That's how intrinsic it is to us. Way back among the Egyptians, and even among people like Aristotle, for example, it was thought that the heart, because it is autonomous, because it functions on its own, must be the place where the soul is. Not only that, but it was even thought to be the place where speech and the voice comes from. Some later scientists had to cut the nerves to the vocal cords to prove that the voice didn't come from the heart. So to the early Greeks, the heart incorporated the soul, it incorporated the spirit, it incorporated our ability to think, and this died hard. Well, we still use all of those metaphors, but to many people, they're not just metaphors. For example, cardiac transplantation. Every once in a while, a patient whose heart has been replaced with another person's begins to have fantasies that something extraordinary is going on within him that comes from outside. Now, the fantasy itself is based on this millennia-long tradition that there is something thinking in the heart. There's something special in the heart. We use it in our language every day, and we realize it's metaphoric, whether we use it as sacred heart in the religious sense, or my heart dies for you, cries for you, sighs for you in the pop sense. It is a special organ always, and has never lost that aura of invincibility over everything.
But there have been times in which they've talked about the supremacy between the idea of the brain versus the heart.
Oh, yeah. Hippocrates, exactly, they were contemporaries, exactly when Aristotle thought it was the heart, thought it was the brain. And of course, the whole question of supremacy jumps all over the place. There have been eminent scientists, and I talk about one or two of them in the book, who thought the stomach was the seat of the soul. And the fact that it came to this particular major scientist in a drug-induced stupor never changed his point of view. And he had many disciples over the centuries who thought the stomach was the central focus of everything that happens in our bodies.
Now, what's your most interesting personal experience about the heart?
Well, you know, the heart, oh God, the heart and I have such a wonderful relationship. You know, part of the book is telling stories about my operating room experiences, and I tell about the very first time I saw an animal's heart in the laboratory. It looked this pulsating, thrusting, crimson thing, looked like it would jump out at the ceiling, for gosh sakes. And so I actually was training to become a cardiac surgeon and loved to be in the operating room and watch cardiac surgery later, do cardiac surgery. Of course, I discovered the cardiac surgeon has a particular kind of personality, and damn it, it wasn't my personality.
Which is what? Hard, tough, driven?
Hard, tough, driven, demanding constant reassurance about his own supremacy, or her own supremacy.
Because they're at life's...
They need danger. They need constantly to overcome danger. They essentially are like tenors. You know what tenors are like?
Yeah. I mean, there's certain, just if you take a sports metaphor, I mean, there's certain people that are born to be quarterbacks and certain people are born to be... Partly it has to do with physicality.
Oh, sure.
You know, and the quality of the throw of football, but it also has to do with other things in terms of people who set out to do things and may end up being a linebacker or a wide receiver. But are there people that, if you are a surgeon and you want to be a heart surgeon, a cardiac surgeon, it's like people who might want to be a fighter pilot. They're a certain
Without
quality.
Question. In fact, I call them Spitfire pilots, because that's the mentality. They take on the greatest challenges, they overcome them, but the important thing is they have to have those rewards every single day, and if they don't get them, there's something missing, and they've got to look for those rewards.
Do you think surgeons want to cut too quickly, generally?
No. No, as a matter of fact, we often say about surgeons, it takes a surgeon a long time to make up his mind, but once he's made up his mind to operate, boy, he wants to be in there in a second. We do tend to be decisive.
Yeah.
We do
but you don't tend to see surgery as the best option, always.
Well, my guess is, and I would predict this for certain, within 50 years there will be very little surgery. John Hunter, who lived in the 18th century and who was a great historic surgeon, brought science into surgery, used to say that a surgeon is a man who overcomes by frontal assault what someone with a little more brain would win by strategy.
Take that, surgeons, from one of your own.
One of my own, right.
You also believe by the end of this century, a mere 99 years from now, we will witness the creation in the test tube of human life.
Yes, we, I think, are within 15 or 20...
This is not, I don't mean by that taking somebody's egg and somebody's sperm and putting them in a little dish.
Yeah, not human life, but life, certainly. We're already 10 years, 15 years down the pike, ready to develop what's called a minimal genome. The genetic structure that will be of such a type that it can reproduce itself and in the proper environment live independently. Once we've got a minimal genome, it will only be a matter of a few decades before single-celled organisms will occur. Human life, no. And of course...
Well, what do you mean human life, no?
Well, human life is such a complex kind of organism. We would have to start with multi-celled organisms. We would then have to develop animals, for example, that can move, that can carry out various ways of getting their own food before we have a human.
Do you believe that there is any institution in the world that can stop it if it's possible? A, in terms of creation in the cell, or B, in terms of cloning?
Yeah, you and me, Charlie, all of us. You know, I've written about this. Actually, I've spoken about it extensively. I'm very concerned about the fact that for the very first time in the history of science, we are doing things in the laboratory that have enormous implications for truly the future of our race, of our society, and of us as individuals. I've always been in favor of giving scientists their head, letting them research what they want to. We have now reached the point where application, I'm afraid, is going to have to be slowed down, where, because the societal impact will be so great, society must have a much larger voice in those decisions. And I'm going to predict to you that it's going to happen. I think science education in this country will improve remarkably in the next 25 years, and that there will be much greater input when, let's say, NIH funds are distributed by the society in general.
But it's also going to take, it seems to me, political leadership that's willing to deal and understands and comprehends and is willing to deal with these huge issues. Not that it should be decided, just by political leadership, but unless there is someone with both the wisdom and the courage to step out and do things, it won't happen.
Well, I guess it depends on how you see leaders. Are leaders who see where the are you a leader because you see where the population is going and you step in front of it, or are you a leader because you lead by example? We like to think that in a democracy it's a combination of both of those things.
You also make some points here beyond the organs. It is that science and religion, or medicine and religion, have to start talking to each other.
To each other and not at each other. I don't know why scientists are so threatened by religion. I've never understood that at all. I have a thesis in the book about it, which is that scientists, by and large, realize how close we are to mystical and magical thinking, and they associate that with religion, and they're afraid of that. But for gosh sakes, something that has to do with evidence before your eyes, with experimentation, with a scientific method, has nothing whatever to do with another system of belief that is founded completely on faith. We call it faith. Right. Why do we call it faith? Because there ain't no evidence. I said to someone the other day that if God appeared on this earth, it would be a good reason for a lot of people to stop believing in him. Because the strength of what we are, or those who are religious, is faith itself.
So what is the dialogue that ought to take place between science and medicine? I mean, just that science has to come has to take note of the fact that faith is a very powerful thing, and respect it, and that those of faith have to understand that science and reality is a very powerful fact, and accept it.
Well, listen, the belief in mystery, the belief in mystical forces, the need to believe that we will live beyond our lifetime, these are virtually biologic characteristics of our species. There will always be religious belief. And once the scientists come to understand that, I think life might be a little easier for
because
them.
We need codes, because we need heroes, because we need a sense of what is the best in us. And those things are defined by values and creeds, and not by math and equations.
Right. What, after all, is monotheism? It's an attempt to emulate the perfect, whether it's a being or whatever it is. It's an attempt to emulate perfection. We need that. We need that morally and ethically. But perhaps more importantly, we need to believe that our lives do not end with death. We need to have some notion that consciousness survives, which
Otherwise, we become...
Otherwise, we become like me, who doesn't believe in any of it. But that's another factor. That's another factor. But it's within the human psyche. I've had to fight that very hard. And, of course, who knows what will happen at the end.
Well, don't you worry about that?
No, I don't, as a matter of fact. But one of my experiences...
And I'm hedging my bets, I'm telling you.
Well, yeah. One of my experiences at the bedside of so many people is you never can predict how they're going to behave during the last week or so.
In terms
of
those people, in other words, how we die, in terms of those people who they all know they're going, do they?
I think everybody knows when.
I mean,
in
other words, within hours before you go, you know generally.
Well, if you're conscious enough,
right.
But the sentient, conscious, thinking people that I've had contact with knew a long, long time ago, and it's one of the reasons for honesty, because everybody knows if you don't honestly tell people about where they stand with their disease, they lose faith in you and they die alone.
Okay, I understand that, but I mean, I know I'm saying that a person who is dying knows the difference between. You may very well know, intellectually and rationally, that it's going to happen in the next 6 months. I mean, you can talk to enough people who'll tell you your chance of beating this are not very good. I'm saying something else. You know you're going to die? Do you know on the day of, within hours? I mean, do you know it? Do we know what it is that people think about that? I mean, it's another subject of your interest.
Well, there's no way to answer the question because we've been so hesitant to talk to people very close to death. Almost no records exist, no studies exist. How do you say to someone who is within 12, 24 hours of death, I'd like to talk to you about your flaws?
What are you thinking now? Because we know you're not going to be here but another hour or so.
Oh, yeah, it's like some devastating fire and half a family dies and you ask another family member, how do you feel about all this? There's no way to do that.
I believe they know.
Oh, I think they do know. There's no doubt about it. They know, but they're denying it at the same time.
There is no overarching theory of the universe, you believe. Anybody who tries to say this is where the whole thing fits is...
Well, the history of thought has been always, ever since 500 B.C., with this fellow Empedocles that I talk about in the book.
Yeah, I know, he's your guy.
Yeah, he's my guy. that there is something, we're all made of air, earth, fire, and water, and so is the cosmos. Well, now we're getting to the same theory that our super-reductionist physicists are talking about. There are the four energies and the various forms of matter than which there is no smaller part. So we're right back to Empedocles, and the question is the mind of man predestined to think that there's some overall control? And is that the reason we think of God, or one of the reasons? And the physicists think of gravity and electromagnetism and the strong force and the weak force, and Empedocles thought about air, earth, fire, and water. Is that something in our minds, or is it that somehow we have always known and intuited that there are basic things beyond which we can't go?
I mentioned you talking here about the heart, and you talk about the spleen. What's interesting about the spleen?
Well, I think the most interesting thing about the spleen is the way it has always been thought to be the place where melancholy derives from, because it produces this stuff called black bile. In Greek, melos, choli, therefore melancholy. And the English reached the point in the 18th and 17th century where they were very proud to be thought of as the melancholy nation. They thought spleen was a disease that ordained them to some superior situation.
And the liver?
Liver, live, the seat of life.
The breath.
Well, the notion was that you eat, and everything you eat goes into the liver where blood is made. And that's why we call it liver. In German, Leben is the verb to live, so it has always been thought of as the source of life, and that's why some ancient seers used to divine by looking at the liver. They looked into the liver to predict to a sick person.
Why not the brain?
Oh, well, that was always the big fight. The Hippocratics thought the brain.
No, but I mean, why don't you include the brain in this?
Oh, why not the brain? Charlie, I have to write about things I know well. The brain would require a book of its own, and not a book, I think, that I would try to write. These are all organs I have lived with, and that's why I'm able to tell the stories in the book that I do.
Sherwin B Nuland, notice you must be a big deal because they put your name above the title, so they're selling you. Author of How We Die, won the National Book Award, The Mysteries Within. And this painting?
Well, you know who that is. That's the famous Rembrandt, The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Tulpius, in which there are incidentally a few anatomical errors.
Mysteries Within, all about how this body works and the organs, and some philosophical explorations of science and medicine and health, life and death. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.